Hey guys, I'd like to welcome everybody back to the channel. This video is going to be a continuation of my 6-hour P320 M18 commercial video where I threw it a few times, ran it over with my truck, trying to get the firearm to fire unintentionally. This video we're going to focus on using holsters and how holsters interact with the particular firearm, whether you have a weapon mounted light or you don't. And I have 3 different weapon lights to try and demonstrate this. There's no live 9mm ammunition on the table. The only case that you'll see used in this video is going to be one primed case. There's no bullet, there's no powder, it's just simply a primed case. So if we do get a uncommanded discharge, nothing's going to get hurt. Just to be transparent with everybody, I absolutely love the P320 line of handguns. I'm currently carrying an X10 Comp, and I'm carrying it in the same holster that I'll be demonstrating here throughout this video. I'm not trying to side with SIG, and I'm not trying to hate on SIG, and I'm not trying to go against them. I'm not trying to support the Glock fanboys, and I'm not trying to support the SIG fanboys. I'm simply an unbiased person outside of personally buying over 10 of these different P320s, which I haven't had any problems with, knock on wood. I'm just simply trying to understand why the 320 is having so many problems. I recognize that there is a problem. I see the videos of these guns going off, but nobody can explain why the guns are going off. What's happening? Is it the gun's fault? Is it the person's fault? Is it the holster's fault? Or is it some other external factor that's causing these guns to fire? I'm not going to get into the history of Glocks, but there's been some cases where the Glocks had issues, and that's long before the internet. Even the M9s had some issues with the locking block, and there's some cases where the slide came off the frame while the gun was being fired, striking people in the mouth and knocking out teeth. So none of these guns are perfect, especially when they first come out. But I'm just simply trying to understand what's going on with the P320 and see if we can't put all this behind us. Because I truly believe at the end of the day that this is a fantastic firearm for many reasons that I could go down that rabbit hole, but I won't. So if y'all like to hear why I like the P320, just drop a comment below and I'll answer that in a separate video. I did just say that at the end of the day, I do like the P320, right? That does not include these unintentional discharges. So please don't waste your time typing those comments down below. I'm simply referring to the firearm itself, what the gun actually is and what it does bring outside of these unintentional discharges. With court litigations and other type of investigative manners, sometimes people are required to or asked to sign a non-disclosure agreement or an NDA. With that means that the parties involved that have direct knowledge to what's going on or potentially have direct knowledge can't speak about what's going on. So we're not going to hear from firsthand people having these issues, what's happening, what's causing these guns to fire unintentionally. Hopefully one day somebody with firsthand experience with this going off unintentionally doesn't sign an NDA and comes forward and tells us exactly what's going on. Is it tolerance stacking? Is it faulty quality control? Is it a holster issue? Is it an operator issue? What is it? But for right now, it's all pure speculation, including what I'm doing. But I'm just simply trying to find the truth. With that, enough talking, let's get into these holsters. When it comes to a holster retaining the weapon system, there's a few different ways that holster manufacturers will make the holsters retain the weapon system. It can either use the trigger guard, or it can use the weapon light, or you can use the hood of the slide. Any sort of a recess here between the slide and the barrel. Of course, this is an airsoft gun, but here we have an actual M18, and there is a bit of a, ridge there. But the holsters that I use, they're either retained by the trigger guard or the retain using the weapon light. And you can see on this particular P320 M18, if you look here, you can see a shiny part on the trigger guard, and that's where it rubs the hole. A few years ago when I picked up this P320 M18 commercial, I immediately fell in love with the TLR 7 Alpha light from Streamlight. It's a fantastic weapon light for a gun of this size for the role that this gun is to be used, in my humble opinion. There were not a lot of light bearing holsters available at the time, and I found this M6 holster by Works, and this has been a fantastic holster. Now the sweat guard was a little bit high for my ultimate liking, and I did trim it down, but I've carried this a lot. Looking inside of this M6 holster, there's nothing that's going to get inside of the trigger guard and press the trigger unintentionally. So as we holster the weapon, we'll flip it upside down. The weapon gets to a certain point and then there's a little bit of a resistance. This is where the light is starting to interface with the locking mechanism inside the holster. So we press it in, and some holsters you'll see where it expands a little bit as it's going into, or I'm sorry, around the weapon light, or actually around the trigger guard into the trigger guard. But this has very minimal flexing, and then it does retain the weapon nicely, and it does contain the weapon to the point where it's pretty difficult to get any kind of foreign object into the holster to get down to the trigger mechanism. Now with any other type of weapon and holster setup, you still have to be careful when you go to holster a weapon. You know, a shirt tail could get in there, or any other kind of foreign object could get inside of the holster itself and interfere with the trigger. And there's been documented cases of that happening, you know, with the Glock handgun. One of which was a fellow officer of mine on my shift who was off duty. His Glock Model 22 was coming out of its holster. He felt it, he shoved it back down in there, and the strap, the old thumb brake strap back in the day, managed to get inside the trigger guard, and when he pushed down on it, that's what pressed the trigger and sent around through his hip, out his cheek, and through his wallet and all that good stuff. So moving on, we have a holster from Black Point Tactical that is not for a weapon mounted light. This is for an M18, M17, and this retains the firearm using the trigger guard. We can see here the divots, or the oval shaped divots here, that's actually going to go into the trigger guard and retain the firearm. Now notice here I do have a primed case. You got the loaded chamber indicator and the loaded shell indicator. So when I holster this weapon, and of course it's off safe, you notice, let's see if I can get this on camera, look right down in here, the holster is going to spread a little bit to work around the trigger guard and then snap inside the trigger guard. So right now, the molded Kydex part is inside the trigger guard. Now with this holster, it is a very, very nice fit. And wiggling it around, there is some movement, and that's par for the course, but there's not enough movement here that this portion of the Kydex could press against the trigger to cause it to fire. This is a properly fitted holster for this weapon. So with that, I have a primed case in here. You can do that all day long and the gun's not going to fire. Here's a crucial concealment holster, again made for the P320. And it also retains the weapon using the trigger guard. And it does so nicely. There's very little gap, so it'd be difficult for any type of foreign object to get down in there. when we, again, if you look down in here, when we go to holster the firearm, there's going to be a little bit of flex to the holster as it's spreading out, allowing the firearm to go into the holster, and then it snaps in place inside the trigger guard and retains the firearm. Again, we can't have this molded too deep, or it could potentially interface with the trigger, causing an unintentional discharge. And it's pretty shallow here, and it's a little deeper here, or so it seems anyway. But again, with this holster, it's a properly fitted holster, and I can do this all day. And again, it's not going to fire, and I do have a primed case in the chamber. Here's an example of an excellent holster, but used improperly. So this is a Black Point Tactical for the M17 with a Streamlight TR1 HL light using a SIG M18. So the holster does not retain the weapon, because this holster retains the weapon by using a light, which this weapon does not have. So I can holster it, but if I turn it over, it's going to fall out. There's no flex to the holster because, again, there's no light on this particular firearm. But you notice that there's quite a bit of gap. So when you're holstering this and you're not careful, if you're wearing an untucked shirt, a button down, or whatever, you could potentially get a shirt tail in there and cause a, I guess, accidental discharge, negligent discharge, or whatever. Also, with this, you could over holster it. That's not a good look, and that's going to hurt you when it comes to try to draw the weapon out should you need it. So while this would work, this is an improper way to use this particular holster and firearm. And this is something that I'm worried about or concerned about in some of these unintentional discharges with the P320. Now, using this same holster with a M17 commemorative with a TR1 HL light, and also this is a M17 optic, it does holster nicely. It does have a great fit to it when it comes to retention. So, I mean, I can shake it a little bit. I mean, I could make the gun come out if I shake hard, but let's be realistic about it. The only concern I have about this is how much gap there is. And with this, I do not have a primed case in the chamber, but I can still get my finger down in there and pull the trigger. So that is a concern of mine. Now, some folks will talk about, Glock and how they've got the trigger safety, or that little dingus, or whatever it's called. And while that can be a viable option or viable solution, I really prefer the 320's trigger over anything Glock. I truly believe that if this was the issue where you just have an excessive amount of gap, that either holster makers need to try to redesign a holster, or people need to reconsider what type of light they use. I mean, there's only so much a holster maker can do, because when you go to holster the weapon with a light, I mean, yes, some of this right here could be molded a little bit differently, try to bring it in some, but it's going to be at least as wide as the weapon light. The weapon light is a little bit wider than the firearm itself. And when we insert the firearm, it is going to flex some, because the holster does retain the weapon system using the light, and it snaps in place, but we still have this gap here. So you have to be cautious about keys dangling off your duty belt or your shirt tail, or whatever, any type of foreign object getting inside that trigger guard. This is another Black Point Tactical holster, but this was procured through 6 Hour's website. And I bought it for this M18X that I've since changed and put a Brower M1811 grip module on. This is a fantastic setup. And a side note here, I really wish the Staccatos and other 2011 type 1911s or 2011s had a grip module more along the lines of this than the blocky kind of squared off modules that they have. But I can take this. Of course, there is a primed case in the chamber. You're going to holster it all day long and nothing's going to happen. Now this holster is a little bit loose because when I bought it and went to set up my pad system here, I was trying to balance the amount of tension that I used along with the tension that I would ultimately place by using this goon tape. Ultimately, the holster is a little bit too light, so there's very, very little flex when I insert the weapon system into the holster. But the holster is designed to retain the weapon system by holding onto the weapon light itself. So you can see that the fit is excellent. You're really not going to get anything inside the trigger guard. It's just a great handgun altogether. It also boils down to the weapon light that you're using. The Foxtrot 2R weapon light here is a lot thinner than the TR1HL light on my M17 commemorative. You know, a holster maker is going to have to make a holster wide enough for this TR1HL. Now I do like this Foxtrot 2R except for using it on a 10mm. So far I've stripped the bolt on 2 of these clamps on a 10mm, but on the 9mm it's holding up just fine. Here's a Safariland ALS holster system, and I believe it's the ALS model, and if I'm incorrect, somebody please comment in the comment section down below. This is an excellent holster for the M17, M18, and while this is an M18 in the M17 holster, it still holds it perfectly fine. The only difference is the length. The M18 is going to come to here versus the M17 is going to be more or less flush mounted. But importantly, what we're looking at is we're looking at the lines around the gun itself and see if there's any way that we can get any type of foreign object into the system. One thing to note is on this particular holster is, well, I wouldn't say it's retained here because it's retained by the ALS system, and this is hooked into the slide here. But we have this ridge here, or this pointed area that could potentially get into the trigger guard. I don't know exactly why it's there, you know, other than maybe try to either support the firearm from wiggling side to side, maybe give the holster some rigidness there. But when we look at certain holsters, we really have to be careful and see if there's any way that we can get something into the trigger guard that shouldn't be there. But again, with this, I do have a prime case in the chamber, and I can wiggle it, push it, jam it in there, and it's not going off. I'm really trying to understand what's going on with these holsters and these guns. And this is the only holster I have that comes close to being a duty rated holster, if you will. Now, if somebody's carrying a firearm like this and working a desk job, this would be a viable option. In my last couple years in law enforcement, I did work a desk. I was a desk sergeant, and I was also a patrol supervisor. And when I worked the desk, I carried a M9 in a holster similar to this. Didn't have a weapon mounted light, and so just carried it in a non-weapon mounted holster. Now, I will say, when I took the firearm off of me, I'd always placed it away from me. I'm not sure why somebody would take the weapon off of them and potentially set it down facing them. And for me to do this, even though there's a prime case in that weapon, really bothers me. I do want to take a quick moment and say God bless the airman who lost his life in the line of duty with the P320. It's a tragic loss. Should have never happened. Whatever the reason was, it happened, but it shouldn't have. Moving forward, I ask for SIG and everybody involved to get their heads out of their fourth point of contact and unfuck all this. It's time that we get the answer out there, what happened, and fix it. The P320 is an excellent firearm. It's an excellent fighting firearm. And I would rather be talking about that than talking about all this. This happens to be my airsoft model that I do my force on force training with. And I use my holster that I talked about earlier. With all that, not everybody in the military and in law enforcement are firearms experts. Too many folks in both career fields carry a firearm because it's simply part of the uniform. I'm not trying to imply anything here, especially with the airman who was killed. But I hear too often military personnel saying, oh, I should be able to carry a firearm post because I'm trained or I'm qualified. But you look at what that person does for a living in the military, and the only time they handle a firearm is once a year when they go to the range to qualify. And shooting a handgun like this out to 50 meters on a target the size of a trash can, I sure hope that you can shoot expert, because if you can't, something's wrong. And by the way, the target's not even shooting back. It's a very elementary course of fire. Same thing with law enforcement. Law enforcement, their qualification does not enable them or say that they're ready for gunfighting. It simply shows that they can demonstrate basic proficiency with a firearm. Now, there's additional classes or training that both career fields can get into or take that actually prepares them for gunfighting. Same thing with civilians. Too many civilians will go out and buy a handgun, fire a box of 50 rounds through it, and say, okay, it's good, and they put the gun in their sock drawer for the next 20 years or however long, maybe never ever to fire it. And that's really not the right answer. Really need to get these guns out, train with them, shoot them. Either try to stay up to date with new evolving TTPs, tactics, techniques, procedures, through your local law enforcement agencies or through active military personnel, or sign up to take training from credible instructors. And there's plenty of them out there. But the point is you really have to train with these and understand how these guns work. And not all guns are perfect. Matter of fact, the first time I got this M18X out of the box and took it to the range and shot it, the slide lever here broke. I was still able to shoot the gun, but it took quite an ordeal to get the broken piece out. But this is a forged slide stop, slide release, takedown lever. Forgot who I bought it from, but yeah, it's pretty stout. So here's just another attempt that I'm trying to make to try to find out what's causing the inadvertent discharges with the P320 line of firearms. So with that, I'd love to hear what y'all had to say. Please drop a comment down below. With that, carry every day, carry everywhere that you can legally, stay safe, get training, and we'll see y'all in the next video. Take care.